Hey everyone, Alex here. Let's get you started on your Power BI journey. In the next 28 minutes, you'll learn key concepts that will set you up to crush your very first dashboard, and I strongly encourage you to follow me along as we go. I hope you learned something new. Enjoy! Okay, let's start by installing Power BI. Go to the Microsoft App Store, go to the top, type in Power BI here, and you should see three different types of Power BI. Power BI, Power BI Desktop, and Power BI Report Builder. For this example, all you need is Power BI Desktop. Go ahead and download it. In this case, I've already. Then once you've downloaded, you should see this page. You won't see this here because this is an actual file that I've already worked on. So your first pop-up should either say Get Data or Recent Sources. You should be able to exit out of this. This is just like what a blank canvas looks like for Power BI. Let's start by getting data. You can see that there's a lot of different paths here, but I want to click More just to show you all the different options we have. For this example, we're going to be using an Excel workbook. If you'd like to follow along, I'll attach a Excel workbook that you can use yourself. So for this example, we're going to hit Excel workbook. Go ahead, click Connect, and then it'll ask you to look through all of your files. In here, it's going to connect, load a little bit. And for the example that I provided an extra table with dummy data that we don't want and an invoice. This is the actual table we want. So just to show you that you can pull in multiple sheets, if there's other types of information you need to pull from an Excel, you can. So here we're just going to select the invoice. And if we want to change things, we can. But for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and load the data. You'll see it's thinking for a little while. It wants to load it, apply it, and set up everything for you. Now, another data source we're going to add is from an OData. So if you go down to More here, we're just going to type in the top OData. You're going to see the OData feed. Now, Microsoft has a database that you can connect to called Northwind. And so I'm going to use the URL here. Feel free to type that in and copy it. And we're just going to pull from one of the data sets. So go ahead and hit OK. You'll have all these different options. So this is all the different data set information that you might need. But for this example, we're only going to pull the categories table. And you can see a preview of what it looks like. So we're going to go ahead and click Load. Now these three buttons on the left are going to help you out a lot. You'll see the report view, the data view, and the model view. So let's go to the data view. You can click on the categories and you can see, oh, there's the information there. And then we can click on the invoice table that we loaded earlier and also see all the information here. Let's go to the model view. In the model view, you'll see that here's our tables again with a line between them. This is a relationship. So if you click on the line itself, you'll see there's category ID and category ID. And there's a 1 on one side and an asterisk on the other. That means that this is a one-to-many relationship. So for a brief overview, there are three types of relationships that you'll see in Power BI. This is a one-to-one relationship. In this case, you'll see an employee only has one social security number, and every social security number only ties back to one employee. There's a one-to-many, like with the one example we saw earlier, where there's one business that has multiple employees. And then there's many-to-many. For example, what if we had books that had multiple authors and authors that had multiple books? This is generally the messiest and most difficult type of relationship, but you don't see it nearly as often as one-to-one or one-to-many. So let's come back to Power BI here. So say it either got the relationship incorrect or it didn't create the relationship automatically. There are a few ways that we can go about this. So say that this relationship was set up incorrectly. Sometimes that happens when you load data and Power BI thinks that there are connections where there aren't actually. We can right click on the line and just hit delete. And then it will ask you if you're sure, you hit yes, and it's gone. Now, if you need to create a relationship between these two, think of it like a VLOOKUP in Excel. You would be able to just click category ID on either side and drag it to the other time where it says category ID. You can see here that it's already populated that automatically. I can right click and hit properties, and it'll even tell you what kind of relationship is. This is a many-to-one, which is the same thing as one-to-many. You have one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. But for this example, you can see it's connected exactly the way we want it to. So before we start building any visuals, I want to show you about editing queries. So there are multiple ways to do that, but the way that I use it the most is going over to one of the tables on the right-hand side and right-clicking and hitting Edit Query. This will pop up a window over here. Sometimes you may get messages like this is super outdated, but you can go ahead and hit refresh and then it'll take care of all of that stuff. Before I start doing stuff here, I want to show you the difference between Power Query and DAX. Now, Power Query is that window that I just opened up. It's also known as the M programming language. It's used for querying data, cleaning it, and loading it. Think of it a lot of like a macro in Excel, where if you do it once and you set it up, it'll apply that every single time. Versus DAX, DAX is a data analysis expression. So it's traditionally used once you've already loaded the data and helps you either create new columns or measures, which I'll explain later on. So if we go here in the Power Query editor, you'll see at the top left, it'll say Power Query editor. And if you drag it around, you'll see that the actual Power BI that we're still at is there, but in a separate window. Now, the first thing I want to do is go to the invoice table, and I want to fix a couple of things. So right here, I can see that the M order date has that M in front of it. Yes, you could technically fix that data in the source, but sometimes you have data sources where you can't alter that data. So the great thing about Power BI is any data you load into Power BI is making a copy of it. So anything you change here in the Power Query portion is not going to change the source data set. So for this case, I just want to rename this. I want to make it something a little bit more useful. So I'm going to go down here, right click, and hit rename. And just call it order date. Likewise, I'm going to do the same thing for required date and ship date. I also want to change a field to filter the shipping country. But I don't necessarily just want to filter it, but also show you how you can add a new column in Power Query. So here we'll go to the Add Column tab in the top left, and we're going to create a conditional column. So there's going to be a pop-up. It's going to ask me what I want to name it. So I'm just going to call this is NA for Is It North America? And then say if the ship country equals USA. I'm going to add a few other ones. Ship country equals Canada. And if ship country equals Mexico, then North America. North America and North America. And if it's not any of these things, here's the else clause. So I'm going to say other. And we're going to go ahead and hit OK. Then you can see this comes up, and if we look at the different options, we have other and North America. If you see the message here that list may be incomplete, it's because Power Query doesn't load all the data while you're working with it to avoid you needing to wait a long time for things to load. If you look at the bottom left, you can see that the column profiling is based on only the top 1,000 rows. Now, I don't even think this data set has 1,000 rows, but it's just something that Power BI does. So now you can see all these applied steps on the right. So everything that I've done from changing type, renaming columns, adding a conditional column, and if I'm filtering anything. Another thing that I could do is if I wanted to take this column that I've just created and filter by it and say I only want to see North America and hit OK, I can, and everything filters. And so when I save and apply this, it'll make sure that all of that stuff happens. Now, the cool thing about the applied steps here is it's going to be applied every single time I refresh this data set. So that's why I compare it a lot to an Excel macro. So if you go back to Home here and click on Advanced Editor, you'll see all of the steps that we've done. So you can say, oh, here's my workbook that I loaded. Here's the source. I've promoted the headers. I've changed the type. I've renamed the columns, added that conditional column, and you can see all the logic we already added in there. And then we filtered the rows. And so this is exactly the step. So something to keep in mind is if you're sharing something like an Excel sheet and you're creating a Power BI, and you want someone else to be able to refresh the data, if you're loading it from your C drive or your personal computer and your computer's turned off, they won't be able to refresh that data set. So once we're done with that, we can go ahead and hit close and apply. So you'll see that I want to apply those things, and that is NA field now pops up into the invoice table. If we go back to the report view, this is where we start building the visualizations. For now, let's start by creating a text box. Let's just call it Invoice Dashboard. And you see there's everything you need to build this in. You can make it whatever font you need, bold it, and adjust for size. All right, let's try creating our first visual. There's a few ways you can create a visual. All of these icons here are a different visual that you can use. You can start by just clicking on one, like this table, or you can click anywhere else in the report, go to somewhere like invoice, and let's just drag customer in here. Automatically, Power BI will try to pull whatever it thinks is most useful to you. For example, if I started clicking somewhere else and I did something like quantity, it would automatically create a bar graph there for me. If you just click on it and hit the delete key, it'll get rid of it. So let's start by creating a table. We're going to click table here, and we're going to drag in all the fields that we need. The customer, the average of unit price, the sum of quantity, and the product name. Now, this field is not actually called the average of unit price, and you can go in Power Query to edit it. However, you can also edit the field name here. Say I want to call it just unit price. Likewise, I can do the same thing with quantity. And if you look here, now it's automatically saying sum of unit price and sum of quantity. Now, I can rename it in the visual here. And if I just wanted to say rename for this visual, name it to unit price. Say I wanted to rename it quantity 2 for some reason. You can hover over on the right side. It'll tell you the source and what it's doing to it. So it'll say the sum of invoice quantity, and it's coming from the invoice table, and it's the quantity field. Now, I need to add the category name. We have category ID on the invoice table, but we don't have the category name. So the great thing about Power BI is once you've set up that relationship, you could drag in any table as long as it has a relationship already set up. You can see here there's a little green checkbox next to the invoice. That's showing that this visual is pulling fields from this table. I can pull that over from the categories to pull in category name. So if we make this a little bit bigger, you can see category name is already pulled in, and it's pulling between two data sources, one from the Excel and the other one from OData. I'm really trying to emphasize the strength of being able to connect between different data sources here. If we want to move these things around, we can just drag them wherever we want. And we could say, category name, customer. Say I want it like this. Customer, then category name, then the product name, then the unit price and quantity. Now this is great, but you can see over here, it's repeating the same information over and over again. But if we switch to a matrix over right next to the table icon, you can see things get a little bit more simplified. So again, it's going to try to interpret what you'd want and what you need it for, but you can see that it moves stuff over here, and that's not necessarily how I want to look at the data. So I'm going to move category name to under the customer, and it cleans things up quite nicely. And you're going to see these icons on the top of this visual here. And there's different ways to drill down. You'll have singular drill down, which allows you to click on any line item and it'll show only that stuff. You can press the up arrow to drill back up. An example, if I only wanted to see the category next, I would hit click down, and you can see it just says beverages, condiments, so on and so forth. Or I can expand everything, which is this little fork icon. And you can see everything is there. And if I want to drill down again, all of a sudden my data is super clean, really easy to understand and drill through. If you hover over this little filter icon right here, you'll be able to see any filters that are going on. Now, one thing you won't be able to see are any filters you've already done in the edit query portion. That won't show through here, and any people who are looking at your reports won't be able to see that either. You'll also have options to focus mode, which will only highlight this specific visual. And then a couple more options like exporting the data, showing it as a table, removing it, spotlighting it, and sorting. Now let's go back to the data, and I want to show you something. I want to figure something out called the days to ship. How long does it take from when a customer orders to us actually shipping the product out? Now, there's a couple things that you'll be able to see, and you can even see at the top here, we have two ways to calculate things. We have measures and we have columns. You'll hear a lot about measures and columns, and there's a lot of aspects where they can be very, very helpful. Sometimes measures and columns will have overlap in terms of the usefulness that they can provide, but it really depends on your specific use case. So for columns, they're heavy duty. They're calculated on the data load. So if you create a new column and you have any kind of function in it, it's going to be looking at that and loading that information. It's focused on the row level detail, and it's contextualized by the row itself. We'll see some examples of that with the date function we're about to build. Meanwhile, measures are lightweight. They're only calculated if you use them. So you can have a few measures and they might not be useful to you in the moment. It doesn't get loaded as long as the user isn't using them. They're not in any of your visuals or filters. I don't recommend you do that, but measures can be a little bit more lightweight. However, both can really start to bog your report down if you have a lot of them in your report. It adds to the level of work Power BI has to do every single time you refresh the data set. Also for measures, they require aggregate information. So you can't just reference a specific field. They don't have row contexts like column calculated fields. They have to use things like sum, average, min, or max. So you can click on invoice, categories, or even create a brand new table to hold your measure. So for this example, we're going to click on invoice, right click, hit new measure, and then we'll see a bar up here that says measure. We're going to rename it days to ship. So I'll show you a quick example of when to use a column and when to use a measure. So in this example, we're going to hit new column and call it days to ship. So we're going to say if, so that's an if statement. If you're familiar with an if statement, you can see at the top, it gives you a little tooltip on how to use it. And we're going to say, we're going to check for is blank, because we've not necessarily shipped every item. There are plenty of items that haven't been shipped yet. We're going to say if is blank, shipped date. So I can just type ship in here and it'll look up. We can hit either tab or enter here. And we want to close the parentheses. So we want to say here, is this field blank? This is blank function returns a true or false. So if it is blank and we haven't shipped it out yet, I don't want it to do this calculation. So I'm just going to say 0. But if it's not blank and it does exist, I want to know the date difference between the ship date and the order date. So I'm going to type date diff. And you can see right there, pops up. And I want to have the order date, comma, ship date, and I want it in days. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And you can see right there, there are my days to ship. So if I want to go back to the report, click on the report view here. You can see the customer, unit price, sum of quantity, and we can add in this days to ship. Now, the problem is it's summing the days to ship. I don't necessarily want that. So I can hover over the values here, and instead of sum of days to ship, I can hit average. And so now I want the average of days to ship. And you can see that it automatically puts it in there. And if we drill down, we can see how it sums things up or averages things up. So you can see right here all the different details for like the dairy products, confections, beverages, etc. So that's super helpful. And that's the way to use a calculated column. So enough with this. Let's rearrange this. You can see the red lines help you move things around. And let's create a few more visuals here. Now I want to create something about days to ship. Let's do days to ship. And let's base it on the order date. You can see it automatically smacks in here. And all of a sudden, it's a date column, and I get everything broken out by year. And if I want to, I can drill down, and then it'll show year within the quarter. I can drill down again. It'll go with the months within those. Go again, and it'll be a line. Say for this example, I want a line chart. So I'm going to switch it just right over to a line chart. Now, because I've made the visual so tall, you can see the big peaks and valleys. So we can normalize that information a little bit. And this helps us kind of simplify things. I think I like this year value a little bit more, showing it at the quarter date. But I can see that there's this title in here that I'm not a big fan of. So I'm going to go over here to the format portion, click on that, and I'm going to hit general. Go to title, and we can see all these things in here. And I'm just going to call it days to ship. And you can see based on the order date when the date to ship is. And you can see it's the average, the sum of days to ship, which is something we don't necessarily want. So let's go ahead, click on the visual again, and make sure it's average. And all of a sudden we get different numbers here. So you can hover over, based on that day was 8 to 8.17. So we're going to start with a clustered column chart. We're going to add in the quantity here. And let's do the category name. And so you can see there's a basic bar chart, the sum of quantity by the category name. You can see everything's in here. Super great. Exactly what we need. Let's shorten that up a little bit. Say I like that title. I'm just going to leave that. So for this example, I'd like to create a card. Now I want to have the average days to ship. You can see that I drag days to ship here and it's automatically summing. If I hit average, it sums up, it matches exactly what we're doing here. Now, let's say I want to duplicate that and use a measure instead of a column. I'm going to try to recreate the same stuff that we did with our calculated column. So I'm going to do average, and we're going to see average X here. And we're going to pick the table, which is invoice. And we want to do the exact same thing we did with the calculated column. We want to do date diff, and we want to say between the order date and the shipped date and day. I'm going to go ahead and hit close. We see the little days to ship measure has popped in, drag that over, and we have average days to ship. But what? That's weird. That's different from our other days to ship. Now, let's try to dig in and see what's going on there. If we drag it over into over here, and you can see here the days to ship. And most of the stuff lines up except for a few examples. So over here, we can look at this and we can see over here, our average days to ship, our calculated column is showing 8.25 versus 11. Or if we go down to, let's look at the Rattlesnake Canyon grocery, we can see it's very different from 7.78 to 5.53. If I go into the data view and look at a very specific thing, so if we look at this product over here, we can say, uh-oh, there's a category of, there's a time where one of the things has no ship date. And what did we put for the average days to ship in the calculated column? We said, if it's blank, just make it 0. However, that means that we haven't shipped that yet. And that means if we're averaging out, that 0 is lowering the overall average. Versus the measure isn't doing that. So you can see that it's higher. It's just ignoring that blank value because it's blank. So this measure actually helped us to show that our logic for the calculated column was incorrect. But you can see as a whole how things were very similar. So for this example, I'm only going to use the measure. Now, if you can, I would recommend that you use measures over calculated columns. Measures are better because they don't use up as much space. However, if you created a calculated column and you needed to be able to filter on that, measures do not allow you to filter on them. So that's when you'd have to use a calculated column. So for this example, let's get rid of our original calculated column, the average days, and we're just going to use this card here. Now, really quickly, I want to show you about the interactivity that is so cool in Power BI. You can click on any one of these visuals and automatically filter all the other visuals based on it. So for example, if I just wanted to see all the beverages and I click on this bar here, everything here automatically filters. If I click again, it gets rid of it. So if I want to click on this customer here and click on that, we can see everything automatically filters. Or maybe I want to see what's the most quantity and filter by there. I can click on the top and it automatically filters. Click again and it does it ascending. Click again. You can just keep going back and forth for ascending or descending. So if we click on Save a Lot Markets here, we can see how much that applies to each visual. And it even changes the days to ship. So if I click on White Clover, you'll see it'll match that 11/28 there, which is really cool. Now on to filtering. So there are multiple different ways that you can filter. You can have filters that you allow your users to toggle or filters that only you can change. So if you look over here on the right, there's two current types of filters that we can do. But if you click on a visual, a third grouping comes in. So you can specify filters at any level. You can filter it at the visual level, at the page level, for all the pages, if you have multiple pages here, or you can create what's called a slicer. So let's start by creating a slicer. Right here is the slicer visual. Go ahead and click that. And we're just going to add the category name. And you can see there's a list. If I click any of those lists, it does the same thing that we had earlier in terms of this. Just lets us filter that. If you hold the control button, it'll let you select multiple. And then if you hit the erase at the top, it'll get rid of that. Now, this is great, but it's a little bit intrusive. I'd like to have more of a drop down. So I'll go to Format Your Visual, Slicer Settings, and then click on Drop Down. And then all of a sudden you have a little drop down here. Drag it, make it a little bit smaller, nestle it nicely at the top here. If we click away, it looks nice and clean. You can click on it. There's all your filterings there. So I want to be able to change the little title here. So go to visual, slicer header, just say category name. We just want it with space. All right. Now, if there are other filters that I want to apply at any level, let's apply a filter specific to this visual, where we say we don't want anything on the order date that is, let's go to relative. We want things in the last 300 days. You can do days, weeks, calendar weeks. We go ahead and hit apply. And then all of a sudden, all of that stuff is filtered. The other thing that's nice is every other filter that you've applied, either through the slicer or on this panel over here. So if we hover over, we can see this filters here. Users can see that when they click on your item and they see it click on the filter and they can say, okay, he's clearly got stuff that is the last 300 days. For this one, it puts out a specific range. Now, if I want to do that at the page level and make sure everything's applied, I can erase here, click out, and then you see filters on the page. I would drag order date over, do relative date again, and we'll just say the last 100 days now, and go ahead and hit apply. Everything gets sorted. So that's a little too granular, so I'd like to do, let's do 200 days then. There we go. So you can see the days to ship. You can still drill down if you want to see the individuals, and everything's filtered. Now, everything that you hover over has that little filter, and you can see that everything is organized that way. Even the little card. Now you've created a pretty good looking report. Now what do you do with it? Well, it's pretty straightforward. All you do is go to publish. It'll ask you if you want to save it. This is a great opportunity to save it something memorable. So we'll just say invoice dashboard. And then it'll ask you what workspace you want to submit it to. Right now, I only have my workspace, which is your personal workspace. If you're a part of a company, you can create a shared workspace for everyone to publish to, depending on the department or depending on whatever your needs are. Think of it like a folder structure. For this example, we're just going to publish it to my workspace. Go ahead, hit select. It'll think about it for a little while, give you a cool did you know, then you can give it a little click to open it in Power BI. And there you go. There's your dashboard. To share it, you can go to File, you can save it as a copy, embed the report, you can publish it to the web, you can manage permissions, you can export it if you need to in Excel or show it in PowerPoint or as a PDF, or you can share it with people or give it to people in Teams. Keep in mind, to be able to share these reports and allow people to have most of the functionality in this, they will also need Power BI licenses, whether it be from O365 or a Power BI Pro license for certain use cases. If you'd like me to cover more about Power BI licenses and the different applications, shoot me a comment below. Thank you so much for watching. If this video was helpful, please give it a like and please feel free to ask any questions you might have in the comments. I love to answer them. If you're still watching, I have one slot left for my August free data plan offering, where I look at a business's current state and develop a plan to introduce and utilize tools like Power BI, completely free of charge. If you're interested, shoot me an email at info@control-analytics.com or comment below. I hope you have a stellar day. See ya!